We are pleased today to welcome back Lieutenant General Dave Deptula, Dean of the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Power Studies and a senior scholar at the U.S. Air Force Academy's Institute for Future Conflict. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
General, the air defense of Europe has become a major political issue following Russia's violation of Estonian airspace by fighter jets, penetration of Polish airspace by almost 2,000 decoy drones, and hundreds of incidents involving drones flying over military bases in Germany, Poland, Scandinavia, and recently even in Belgium. The Baltic states are the most exposed, being geographically between Russia, the Kaliningrad exclave, and Belarus. Russian drones have repeatedly crashed in Lithuania. The Baltic states rely on the NATO allies to provide fighter jets and have only modest air defense missile systems. So what kind of Russian air and missile attacks should the Baltic states be prepared to defend against? Shahed drones, maybe missiles or fighter jets, or all of the above?
I think the short answer is all of them, because what the Baltics need to be ready for are layered, mixed salvo attacks that combine one-way attack drones, which, oh, by the way, in reality are cruise missiles of the Shahed Jiran 2 class in large numbers that the Russians would use to saturate and probe. They also need to be ready to defend against jet-powered cruise missiles like the KH-101 or KH-22 launched from bombers and ships. Then to defend against ground as well as air-launched ballistic missiles and hypersonic missiles that the Russians will use for time-sensitive or hardened targets. And then finally, fighter and bomber standoff weapons, especially glide bombs, to attack from inside Russian air defenses. If you think about it, that's the Russian pattern in attacking Ukraine. And it's already spilling over Europe's borders, as you just mentioned, with fighter incursions into Estonia, drone penetrations into Poland, and unidentified drones over bases in Belgium. So the Baltics must assume similar tactics that would be aimed at their power plants, ports, command and control facilities, and air bases. So it's a lot to consider, but that's what the Baltics need to be prepared for.
The Ukrainians recently criticized NATO's use of fighter jets and $1 million missiles to destroy $10,000 Russian decoy drones. Ukraine has used mobile air defense groups with its Second World War era guns, also propeller training aircraft, helicopters, and cheap interceptor drones to destroy Shahed. Could you please explain for our audience the cost of trade-offs in air defense?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. As you mentioned, Russia's Shahed-type drones cost on the order of just tens or thousands of dollars. Patriot or similar interceptors, as well as fighter jets with advanced air-to-air missiles, can run into millions. And if you answer cheap salvos with only very high-cost interceptors, the adversary may ultimately win a cost exchange fight. But be careful with this logic. If cheap drones are targeted at schools, homes, or shopping centers filled with civilians or children, are you not going to shoot them down because your missiles are more expensive than the drones? I don't think so. And so one has to remember warfare isn't about what provides the least expensive outcome. It's about winning. And I think if you look at Ukraine's solution that they have adapted over the last 3.5 years it's a tiered mix. So there's low-cost defeat of some of these drones by using mobile fire groups, which you mentioned with 23 to 35 millimeter guns, and cheap interceptor drones, all far cheaper per kill than larger surface-to-air missile systems. And then for the mid-tier, they use short-range, man-portable weapons for faster or higher drones, and then they save the high-end systems like Patriot or SAM-T for ballistic missiles in aircraft. So the bottom line is, yeah, if it's possible, you want to use the cheapest effector first, and then save high-end weapons for what only those high-end weapons can kill. But if you can't make that choice, you need to defend with what you have that's effective.
Good point, thank you. Now, the EU is debating how to construct a so-called drone wall, defense across Europe to defeat Russian drone incursions and attacks. But experts say that this is only a part of the solution for Europe's air defense. Could you please explain all of the capabilities Europe will need to defend against Russia's drones, missiles, and jets?
Yeah, you bet. Certainly a wall of sensors and electronic warfare jammers along the frontier is very smart. And the European Union is now pushing to expand the so-called drone wall into a continent-wide network. But that's only one layer. What Europe really needs, and to a degree, they have some of this, but they need an integrated air and missile defense system that consists really of 5 elements. The first one is persistent sensing and command and control. That consists of airborne warning and control system aircraft, tethered aerostats, ground-based radars, a whole series of systems. It would also be very smart, and I know they're planning on doing this, but for NATO to replace its aging E3 airborne warning and control system with E7 Wedgetails, which are significantly more capable. Then secondly, electronic warfare to spoof or jam the Russian guidance systems, the data links, and operations that they conduct in the entire electromagnetic spectrum. Then there are layered shooters, starting with guns, using lasers and microwave where that's viable, manpads and short-range air defense systems, medium-range air defense such as NASAMS and IRIS-T, and long-range air defense like Patriots and SAM-T. Then there's hardening and redundancy. There's shelters for your aircraft, dispersed basing, mobile power and rapid runway repair. And finally, probably the most important element from a deterrent perspective is counterstrike capability. And that's long-range attack capability to kill the archers, not just shoot the arrows that are shot at you. So the ability to degrade Russia's launch complexes and its bomber bases. Of course, the perfect example here was Ukraine's Operation Spiderweb, which showed how striking the source of the threat can reshape that threat.
And could you please explain in details the challenges in detection and tracking drones, especially low-flying ones, because we had this problem here in Lithuania. After all, many drones disrupt airports and spy on strategic objects. This indicates the challenges in detection, tracking, and also interception.
Yeah. Well, there are a couple of reasons why low-flying small drones are hard to find and track. First is simply physics. The small radar cross-section at low altitude allows them to hide in ground clutter and below the radar horizon. Then there's kinematics. Their slow, erratic profiles often make them look like birds, and false alarms on radars climb in that respect. Then there's materials and there's signatures. These drones can be made up of composites, and they have small propellers. All of that equates to a very weak return on the radar system and very quiet acoustics. And then finally, there's the environment. Operating in urban areas, there's a lot of terrain masking that defeats single sensor solutions. So the answer is multi-phenomenology. In other words, using radar, radio frequency detection, electro-optical, infrared, and acoustic detection, all fused into one system. And then really to facilitate defense against these kinds of swarms of drones, artificial intelligence, which provides automated identification of the drones, goes a long way to controlling this kind of threat. So, there are a lot of things that NATO and the European nations are doing with respect to counter drones, but in a nutshell, those are some of the challenges that small drones present.
General, do you support the idea of some people, experts, and so on, that Europe and Ukraine need should create a common, integrated air defense system, maybe this kind of air defense wall, yeah? And despite that, Ukraine is not in NATO.
No, absolutely. Look, Ukraine, it may not be in NATO, but that should not prohibit European nations from partnering with Ukraine in developing integrated air defense systems. And that's probably the next step to make Russia understand that, they're not going to be able to isolate European nations or NATO nations from assisting or working with Ukraine to form a Western defense, if you will, to prevent and at least deal with Russia's proven aggression.
You served in the U.S. Air Force as an F-15 interceptor pilot for many years. Given your experience, what do you see as major challenges specifically for Europe Air Force in dealing with Russian capabilities? Is current training sufficient? Do European air defense have a sufficient number of fighter jets, or do we need more AWACS jets for surveillance?
Well, it's a great question, and one that we could spend an hour discussing alone, as is the case with many of your great questions.
I would happy to, but we don't have so much time right now.
I know. I will do my best to shorten it. But there are really three big challenges that come to mind from someone who's flown and studied air warfare for many decades. First is mass and readiness. Okay, many European air forces are small with limited surge capacity and constrained sustainment pipelines. Now, Europe is buying F-35s and upgrading legacy aircraft, but readiness and munitions depth remains a pacing issue. Second, there's sensing and control. I mentioned earlier that the E-3 AWACS fleet is rapidly aging. So Europe needs to increase its airborne early warning and control availability as rapidly as possible. And the best way to do that's with the E-7 because it has much more capability than, say, the GlobalEye or other smaller systems. And then third, integrated air and missile defense integration and training. Okay, much tighter fighter, ground-based air defense, electronic warfare integration. Becoming comfortable again with dispersed operations. Ukraine's Air Force has mastered this capability. And then high-tempo, quick reaction alert in the Baltics is essential. And that needs continuous exercising under realistic rules of engagement. So those are kind of my focus on those three are what the European Air Forces face as their biggest challenge.
Actually, we are seeing a heated debate now in NATO capitals over rules of engagement for dealing with the Russian jets that are violating NATO airspace. Some politicians urge caution, others want to punish the Russians for their provocation. Could you explain the arguments and the risks of being too cautious or too aggressive?
Yeah, again, great question. First, in general, if the rules of engagement are too cautious, it will simply invite Russian exploitation and aggression. They'll be doing more probes of the airspace. They'll be flying closer to interceptor aircraft. There'll be a risk to civil air traffic, and eventually could end up with miscalculation and tragedy. If it's too aggressive, that may risk escalation, especially when Russians operate near their own air defenses. The best practice, I believe, is a graduated set of rules of engagement. Early identification and escort, firm and clear communications to indicate once intercepted that you need to leave the airspace. Then to begin with non-kinetic compellents such as using flares or electronic countermeasures. And then there do have to be pre-briefed and well-understood tripwires for weapons employment and allied transparency publicly to shape behavior to prevent accidental war. And I think you'd agree that recent Estonian and Polish incidents show why clear thresholds matter. And so I would hope that NATO and European nations would put in very clear rules of engagement and then execute them. So, like I said, it needs to be graduated. You intercept, you escort out. If there is any kind of aggressive behavior, then you eliminate the threat.
Ukraine's Operation Spiderweb resulted in the destruction of several Russian heavy bombers and severe damage to at least 2,000 bombers using small and cheap drones. Why has there been such complacency in the West in preparing air-based defenses to deal with drone attacks, given how easily drones can be smuggled across borders?
Again, it's a great question. Western air bases were optimized for missile attacks and saboteurs, not swarms of, $1,000 to $10,000 drones. That said, hardened aircraft shelters can be very effective in preventing air forces on the ground, and you know this pretty well. And they were common and still are across NATO during the Cold War. But I would also offer that after nearly 4 years of war, no Ukrainian air bases have been put out of commission by drones. Air bases are hard to kill. It's the aircraft that you want to protect. As we saw with Spiderweb, that did prove how small, covertly staged drones can cripple bomber fleets thousands of kilometers away. So Europe's now catching up, hardening more aircraft shelters, assembling and coming up with tactics, techniques, and procedures for countering drone attacks, constant patrols, counterintelligence. But yeah, gaps remain, especially at dispersed and reserved sites. But I think that respectively, Western countries understand the threat, and they're working hard to put together effective defenses.
And let's dwell a bit on Russia's capabilities. I mean that Russian Air Force has performed, it's common belief that very poorly in Ukraine. Could you please explain to our audience their shortcoming in capabilities, training, and how the Russians employ their air power?
Yeah, well, it was very evident to see that Russia's initial failure to suppress Ukrainian air defenses and achieve air superiority is what resulted in their failure to capture Kyiv, and to a large degree has prevented them from achieving their conquest of Ukraine. Why? I would share with you that there are three principal reasons. First is poor leadership. Cronyism, not merit, is how Russians increase in rank. And, you know, they are just not a well-led Air Force, or military for that matter. Second, poor training. The Russian Air Force did not have realistic training prior to the outbreak of this war. Now, I'm going to come back to that point because, you know, they're learning. And then number three is inadequate and very restricted air power doctrine. The Russians historically have treated aircraft as extensions of their ground forces and not as an independent means to achieve strategic outcomes or objectives. And then their leadership exerts very strict control. So their rigid doctrine, low pilot training and seasoning constrain the initiative. But they are learning and they are adapting. And the longer the war goes on, the better the Russian Air Force will become. So that in itself is a motivation to get this over with as quickly as possible.
There have been conflicting claims in the Western media about the strength of Russia's Air Force and the ability of Russia's weakened industry to support their fleet of fighter and bomber jets. Are claims that Russia still has 1,600 operational combat jets realistic? What's your opinion?
I think that figure inflates reality. Raw inventory counts blend stored aircraft, non-mission capable aircraft, and training aircraft with combat-ready jets. Independent references like the International Institute for Strategic Studies military balance caution that operational availability is well below these kind of headline totals. Ongoing combat wear, maintenance backlogs, and limited production reduce the actual usable numbers of aircraft, and that's what's important. So this, 1,600 number I'd treat as notional, certainly not operational. By the way, it also speaks to the effectiveness of Ukraine's Air Force, who has less than 100 operational aircraft. And look at the difference in terms of force application and effectiveness.
You recently wrote about how successful Ukraine's F-16 force has been in performing both air defense and strikes. President Donald Trump said that Ukraine can take back all of its territories. But without air superiority, it's impossible. What capabilities would ensure the Ukrainian Air Force could achieve air superiority?
Well, first, I think it's important to understand that air superiority is a condition. Okay, it's not just based on a single platform or one capability. It is a condition where friendly air forces are able to operate without interference by enemy air forces. So what Ukraine needs, quite frankly, is a combination of 5 elements. First, they need more networked fourth-generation fighters, preferably more F-16s. They really don't have that many but the ones they do have, they're using extremely well. Imagine if they had more. And then they need modern air-to-air missiles, Link 16 integration, so that they can communicate instantaneously and with full situational awareness. And then they need integrated airborne warning and control support to push Russian aircraft off the forward edge of the battle area and be able to prevent and shoot down their glide bomb carriers. Second, air superiority also consists of incorporating a dense, mobile, integrated air and missile defense system with surface-to-air interceptors to deny Russia survivable locations and corridors, and also to protect Ukrainian air bases. Third, and this is very important, the ability to conduct long-range strike and counter-air operations. This is right now, the most feasible means to be able to do this is with long-range cruise missiles. This is why Ukraine really should get Tomahawks from the United States as soon as possible, because these kinds of weapons provide deep reach to hit Russian bomber bases, fighter bases, radar, depots, the facilities that build the Russian equivalents of the Shaheeds. So it is fundamental to the offensive use of air power to be able to degrade, to hit, and destroy an enemy's production and sustainment capacity. And that's what long-range, both cruise missile and airstrike can do. Then there's sustainment. Ukraine requires continuous resupply given at the rate of expenditure of their missiles. They need spare parts for their aircraft. What they're doing in maintaining their F-16s without contract logistics support is incredible. But they do require replacement parts. They need additional and more advanced electronic warfare pods. And then there's training pipelines. And then finally, there's the decision cycle speed piece. And this is very significant. And what I'm talking about here is real-time queuing from NATO and friendly nations' command and control capabilities, as well as intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So with all those elements in place, air superiority becomes achievable. Enough that air forces could partner with Ukrainian ground forces to achieve breakout and maneuver and begin to push back the Russian aggressors.
General, and my last question. You're widely known for your brilliant planning of the air campaign in Operation Desert Storm in Iraq. How would you describe the major changes in warfare between then and now?
It's an excellent question. Once again, like many of your other really good questions, we could spend an hour just on this subject alone. Clearly, capabilities have advanced. But what allowed us to succeed in Desert Storm was an offensive mindset that allowed us to combine modern technology in the form of stealth, which is now available to even greater degree. Back then we had F-117s, today we have F-22s and F-35s, but we capitalized on stealth and precision munitions in conjunction with an effects-based approach to targeting. And that's what you saw with Operation Spiderweb. Okay, there was a unique application of the capabilities that Ukraine had to achieve a desired outcome, and that was to reduce Russian long-range aviation. So the philosophy is one that I think the Ukrainians are using. There needs to be greater integration between air and ground forces, and they need the equipment. And by the way, with respect to the implications for European nations, we talked about it earlier. All the NATO nations acquiring, or let's put it this way, the number of NATO nations that are acquiring F-35s is very, very significant and will form the backbone of deterrence for long into the future. But now there needs to be greater integration between the capabilities as well as with the command and control and the intelligence to form an offensive kill web that can effectively deter and, if necessary, defeat future aggression. So in a nutshell, yes, technologies have advanced. Back during Desert Storm, we did not have all-weather precision-guided weapons. We only had a handful of laser-guided weapons, and if there were clouds in the area, that would interfere with the weapon. So we've advanced to a degree in terms of both precision and stealth. And then there's been this introduction of very low-cost weapons in the context of what people are calling drones. But in reality, those small quadcopters with hand grenades are effectively precision-guided munitions that every individual soldier now has control of. And those drones are having a much, much greater impact in the close battle on the ground than they are in interfering with the application of air power. But smartly used, as we saw in Spiderweb, they can be part of this strategic mindset to create desired effects in the conduct of warfare. So in the interest of time, I'll wrap it up there, and I very much appreciate the opportunity to have this chat with you this morning.
Yeah, and I really hope to have this 1 hour interview next time with you. Thank you very much for your time, and my great pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you. Have a great day.